Welcome, everybody. On behalf of the National Career Development Association, welcome to today's webinar series. We are pleased that you have joined us. Before we get started, I want to share some technical information with you. During the webinar, all attendees' microphones will be muted. We encourage any questions to be typed into the chat section, which can be found on the lower section of your screen. Our presenters will address those questions at the end of the presentation. Individuals who have signed up for the webinar can log into their account on the NCDA website to view their continuing education certificates beginning next week. Groups that are attending will need to return their sign-in sheets to me in order to receive their certificates. This program is approved for 1 contact hour of continuing education. For any questions, you can contact me, Alicia Cheek, at NCDA headquarters. Our presenters today are Sarah Burns, Director of Learning at the San Diego Workforce Partnership, and Peter Kallstrom, CEO of the San Diego Workforce Partnership. I will now turn it over to Sarah. Thank you, Sarah and Peter, for presenting today.
Of course. Thank you so much, Alicia, for having us. And it's nice to have you all with us today. I'm actually going to turn it over to Peter to get us started, and then we'll go from there.
All right. Thank you, Alicia and Sarah, and great to be with you all, and look forward to sharing a little bit about how we're going about this concept of really bringing education and workforce development much closer together. And we've been working at it for some years now, and Sarah's really spearheading this work with our partners in the region. And so I'll kick it off with a little overview of what we're all about and then pass to Sarah. So next, please. So just to give you a picture of what our region looks like, we are the Workforce Development Board for the entire county, and it's a very large county. We're a 10th of the state in population, so 3.4 million and growing. It is a very dynamic growing area. And we have a number of what we call priority sectors or in-demand sectors that we've identified in our region, but we have what we call 3 really driving key sectors that really then feed everything. And we have a 250,000 veterans in the region, not to mention the other installations with Miramar and Camp Pendleton. And so it's a very military-centric region. Huge tourism area, and that's really been heavily impacted, obviously, by COVID, but it's beginning to come back. And then a huge innovation sector. Each one of those 3 account for in the neighborhood of 175 to 200,000 positions in our region alone. Next. Here's a little bit about how we work. As the Workforce Development Board and for our region, there's 550 around the country in all different sizes and shapes and how we go about it. But we work with different funding sources. So we bring funding to the region through some formula funding that comes from DC through Department of Labor. And then we have added on to that with other partners with private sector and philanthropy to do a lot more than the typical Workforce Development Board might. And then so we bring our region together. We do convenings in normal times, really large conferences that have gone virtual, unfortunately, but hopefully this is the year of returning back to being together. So we work hard on identifying what the gaps are, the needs are with our region by understanding our employer community and what they need and what skills and careers to train for. And then we not only fund different programs through different providers, but we deliver them ourselves directly. And in recent years, again, we've really leaned heavily into partnering with the K through 12 space, which we'll be talking about today. Next. So we serve the entire region, but our focus is upon reaching underserved and underrepresented populations in a wide variety of ways through, again, funding different CBOs in the region and doing the work very directly. But we're really trying to reach in a very intentional way different populations so that we can uplift them and provide them the opportunities to achieve their career goals. Next. So there's 45 boards in our state, 550 around the country. Again, all very different sizes and shapes and ways of delivery. Some boards are a part of a city or county department and may just be dealing with the Department of Labor funding, which is really important, and how you deploy that work and fund the Career Center network, which is across the country. And then we're a 501c3, so we have the independence to be able to work with private sector and philanthropy in a lot of other unique ways. And so that's allowed us to really branch out and do some of the work that you'll see today. Next. So part of how this began was 5, 6, 7 years ago now, losing track of time. We took our research, which until that point had been your typical bound report or PDF, and in partner with the gentleman you see at the bottom, Ed Hidalgo, he challenged us by saying, how are we going to get these reports in front of kids so that they can really use this data and research in meaningful ways? And so we together came up with poster boards of what our in-demand priority sector careers were. And so you can see snapshots of them there. And then we built other educational materials to augment those so people could dive deeper. But just that front end visual of looking at what these careers are really addresses Ed's quote that we love, is how do kids aspire to careers that they don't know exist? And it's so true with a mega region like ours, as Ed's shared with us, some of the kids that he's worked with in different roles that he's had have never even been to the ocean, believe it or not, being on a county that borders the Pacific Ocean, because we live within our communities. We don't know what else is out there. We don't have the opportunities to explore, but the talent is there. We just need to be able to tap into what youth are interested in. And these posters were the start of the work that we're sharing today. Next. And it really comes down to this: the educational experience is it going to be boring and disengaging for kids, and then they lose interest and lose why they're there? I think that's all too typical. And the next. But by implementing what Sarah will share around the RIASEC framework, which Ed brought to us, a great assessment tool for kids and job seekers really of all ages to identify their individual strengths, interests, and values. And it really has turned on kids to be excited about their academic pursuits and to understand really why they're there and how that leads to their future selves. Next. And this is an actual classroom picture within Gohan Valley where Ed Hidalgo and Superintendent Mia Shiro are, where they've implemented this partnership that we've worked on for years now. And the kids are on fire. They love it. They have meaning. They know who they are. They understand the career opportunities out there. And it's really been transformative, not only for the classroom experience, but for our work as a workforce development board, where typically we're just going to be working with late teens through career, but primarily adults and dislocated workers. And there's that chasm in between, because if we're not embedding workforce thinking and exploration early on, then we have a huge chasm, and too many people then end up in our career centers later on in their career because they still don't know who they are or what they want to do with their career. And we have to change that completely and get in early and make it happen. And that's beginning to happen. And next. And over to Sarah.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. And it's the perfect transition really into a visual of what is it that we're trying to do. And in the typical flow from a school, there's a very siloed focus, right? We're talking about this concept of silos or partners on we are preparing you for the next thing, which is college or post-secondary training or work. And when that goes really well, then someone experiences career success, and maybe later down the line, they may be laid off or dislocated or change their career or need to upskill. And that's where we typically come in to support that person, lend a hand when they need to get back on track. In the worst case scenario from school, a young person becomes disconnected, and either they end up in a job with limited advancement opportunity, or no job, no school at all, at an age when you would expect those things to be happening. And that's another place where we intervene typically. We lend that hand to reconnect that individual, that young person, with work or school or training, whatever they need to get to that next step in their journey. And what we have been building primarily with Gohan Valley School District, that Peter shared with you, and also with other school districts around our region. You saw that map that Peter shared originally. Our region is about the size of the state of Connecticut, if you're somewhere else in the country and aren't used to the scale of California, which is what I experienced when I moved here. About the size of Connecticut, we have 42 different school districts. There's a lot going on, but we've been able to work closely to lend a hand while students are in school so that we're able to help inform them of their career possibilities. It's not about tracking them into making a decision at a young age, but about exploring and expanding their world to expose them to those opportunities they might not have seen before, and giving them the skills to navigate a career, to navigate the world. As life demands pop up, they're able to then pivot and continue to be successful and find the resources and have the internal resources to do it as well. So overall, it's this idea of building a proactive collaboration rather than a reactive one, which is where a workforce board usually sits. As a workforce board, we have all of this insight into our labor market. We have access to data and research. And while our school partners are focusing on the work of educating students and the content that they need, we're able to bring in and build pieces where we can hand it off and say, we've got this knowledge covered. Let's help you get it implemented in a way that's not adding another thing to a teacher's plate, which can be really overwhelming as an educator. So what are we basing all this on? How do we know it's working? And there's lots of research out in the world generally, of course, around career development, around best practices and what is most useful. But I'm highlighting this one white paper from the OECD Career Readiness Project, which was a series that came out last year that looked at longitudinal data from several OECD countries to see what interventions at the teenage years impacted career readiness in a positive way later on in life as an adult. And you can see those three topics there, that when teenagers spent time exploring the future, experiencing the future, and thinking about the future, that they had better career outcomes later on. And you can see some of the details down there. One I want to point out is this one, those career conversations, including with teachers. This work can't happen with one meeting with a career counselor in your senior year of high school. It needs to be as early as possible. It needs to be ongoing, and it needs to be coming from many conversations and explorations over the course of your education. And so, how do we support our schools and our teachers in being able to have these conversations? I know when I started my career, I spent 5 years as a high school teacher, and I didn't really have a good answer to that question of why are we learning this? And I could say, you know what, it's to open doors for your future, because you don't know what you're going to be. You don't know who you're going to be in the years to come. The more you learn now, the more doors will be open to you later. But I didn't know there were resources out there where I could actually connect my students with data and experiences of careers to really paint a clear picture, right? This thinking about the future, this certainty, ambition, alignment, that's being able to visualize and have a plan and a goal for what you want to be down the road. And there's ways that we can incorporate that into what's happening in the school day. And so how have we done this? And I'm going to go through 3 strategies that we've really leaned on. And they've happened roughly in this order and then kind of cycle through. And that first one is creating shared spaces. Second is finding common language and then developing shared resources. So in creating shared spaces, I don't really mean physical spaces, but it's creating the opportunities to engage in the places where we both already are. So for us as a workforce board, it's getting educators like Ed to come and sit on our board and be in the conversation with employers in the community, to hear what those employers are talking about, to share from the educator's perspective how they can work better together and close those skills gaps and the needs that employers have. It's about, on our side, creating, or on the school side, helping to listen to what schools are saying, to engage with the school conversations and the school community, to go into the schools and hear what's happening, and then to work together to actively pursue funding, host convenings, and create those spaces. It's about building relationships, because once we have engaged in those conversations and those spaces and built that trust, it's a lot easier to take those next steps. That second step of building a common language came in a couple of different ways. The first one, if you're in the career development world, you're probably at least vaguely familiar with the RIASEC framework. It's based on John Holland's work and his theory of vocational interests, and it's all about connecting your own interests with workplace environments. And what we learned from being in those shared spaces is that some of our school districts were already starting to use this language as young as kindergarten to help students to form that self-concept, to connect themselves with their future possible selves in the world of work. And this is a huge opportunity because this is language that we use in career development. If you know, the ONET website uses these same interests in their interest inventory. They categorize all jobs that the BLS categorizes using these different interest types. So we found a place of shared language that we could build from. Another area of shared language is what we call the essential skills. And there's lots of names that people use: soft skills, workplace readiness skills. But what we identified in our collaboration and in partnering with the County Office of Education in San Diego, that supports all 42 of those school districts, is that there are these 6 categories of skills that we know employers, through our research, have talked about endlessly and saying, if they can just do these things, I will hire them and I will teach them everything else on the job. So schools also talk a lot about these things. They also are really relevant in the context of social emotional learning. And it's the not what we do skills, it's the how we do that work. So in creating posters and rubrics and some tools we'll look at a little bit later, we're able to leverage this shared language as well. And then finally, we took sort of those 2 pieces and built them into a model that we can use to create entry points to the larger concept of navigating your career. It's a really overwhelming place to be in at any point in your life when you don't know what your next step is. So being able to focus in on one knob, that one dial that you can turn to start to make that decision or focus on, can be really beneficial. So we can talk about our interests, what you love. We can talk about the labor market information, what you can be paid for. We can talk about the specific knowledge, skills, and abilities that an employer is looking for. And then, of course, what you need as an individual in terms of pay, in terms of what your life circumstance is. And we can use those 4 pieces and those 4 bits of common language to help people think about, at what point in your life are you going to be in this section between what you need and what you can be paid for? That's a valid step in your career journey. And that makes you aware of where you are and which of these things you might want to work on next to move closer to that center of what your ideal job might be. So we can use this language and this model to start talking through career navigation. So once we found our common language, it was about creating those common resources and integrating the shared language into it. You can see here on the left an example of the updated version of those posters that Peter shared in the beginning, where it was very data focused before. We really brought in the RIASEC framework and some example occupations to show students who are already using that language that there's a place for me in any sector, no matter which of these themes I identify with. We created some 2-page handouts that could be used in a classroom setting or in a career advising setting. And I'll just zoom in a little bit into what that looks like. Gives a little explanation, make sure that that common language is reinforced, and then gives an example of jobs at different levels of pay, different levels of educational attainment, and across those interest themes that might fit. We also, and there's no sound on this, so do not panic, created a set of videos to be able to have people walk through and just show to students or to job seekers what we're talking about in this world of the Ikigai in interests. They're, about a minute long each. So people are able to engage with them quickly in bite-sized pieces. And, it just supports that learning and that content. So those are all on our website at workforce.org/Ikigai. And then we have another tool, another website that we created. It's sort of a subset of our website to, again, put this information out there for educators and community partners to use. And that's workforce.org/mynextmove. And it is a site that walks people through our various priority sectors, gives them the opportunity to explore jobs that are going to have high growth, employment, and sustainable wages in the future, has opportunities to take an interest assessment right there so that they can connect with those opportunities that fit them the best, talks through those essential skills we talked about, showcases that common language, has tools like this where they can see, okay, if I want to be a software developer, where can I do that? And helps them to break through some assumptions of, I need to work for a tech company to do that, when that's a job that can happen in literally any one of our 7 priority sectors that we focus on in our region. And again, highlights those jobs and opportunities, and then connects them to this site called Career Coach, where they can get really specific labor market data, see local programs where they can get trained. They can use a resume builder, they can see online careers. So there's a million different activities that you could link to exploring these tools and planning for your future. And then finally, as I mentioned, the essential skills rubrics, we created these in collaboration with the County Office of Education, but to break down each of those little blurbs a little bit more and create an opportunity for reflection and incorporation into what is happening in the class. So there's an implementation guide where there are some ideas of, okay, if you're doing a group project, maybe you focus on one essential skill and use this rubric for students to reflect before and after. Maybe they use it to give feedback on each other's performance and how the work went overall. And in the context of doing that, they're preparing for the world of work in a way that is really authentic, where if you're engaging in a project in your company, right, or your organization, being able to have those kickoff meetings, right, and debriefs, and reflect on what went well and what didn't in context of how a team worked together or how we performed is a really valuable skill. So using these essential skill rubrics can be a way to do that. Another video, again, there's not sound, so don't panic if you can't hear. So we took this idea of physical resources and took it really to the next level of physical resources. We collaborated with Gohan Value to create a physical career development space in what was formerly their library. You can see that shelf in the background. There's kind of a couple of shelves of books left, but certainly not a whole room like there might have been in the past. So this now is an engaging space where you can see the displays on the wall, you can see the activity booklets, where they can start to answer those questions of who am I, who might I become, and how can I get there? Instead of really what I consider a more traditional career center, where you have like binders of college information that you might flip through or some like pennants on the wall, but isn't an engaging exploratory experience like that. So this was sort of the culmination of all of this effort together to think about how do we take the next step in bringing this to life. This has now been duplicated or replicated by this district in, I think, 6 of their middle schools, and they're really owning and running with and creating this model in different ways. Students are rotating through part of their school day. Some schools are creating a specific dedicated elective class where they are engaging in this work and this exploration. And we're supporting that with the labor market information, with the connections with different companies they might look for in the future. And then thinking about how we take it to the next level of engaging parents and families in these spaces as well, so that we're having that 2-generational impact where students are thinking about their future and able to connect to their future possible selves. And parents are able to think about where they want to go next with their career, connect with the resources we have for them, and support the family in growing together. And then I would say our most recent approach for this work has been really getting closer and into the weeds and that in-school support. Our initial work was creating all of these great resources and kind of sending them out to the world for people to take and then do what they please with, create some lessons, incorporate this some way. The reality is, if you're an educator, you don't have a whole lot of time to explore these new resources and incorporate them in new and creative ways. You can certainly do that for a couple of lessons here and there throughout the year, but it's going to be really difficult to do. So we're looking more at how we provide that support and make it achievable. And we've been doing this through professional development, through working with schools to write career exploration curriculum. We've incorporated into advisory periods, and then also supporting on department levels in terms of instructional design. How can you and what resources are best to bring into a classroom in a really engaging way or simple way? Is there a quick 3-minute video you can show at the beginning of a class of somebody who is talking about career? And this is just showing one of my colleagues in one of the intro videos that we created to go along with this curriculum to explain what's going to happen during the class, that the teacher can take the lesson plan and just deliver it. We build it into Google Classroom for them so that they can, get out of their prep or get out of their class, maybe in 5 minutes in their prep, review it and be ready. And based on the PD that we did with them as well, they're able to implement it. So we're continuing to grow and evolve in this work. And really it's through this feedback cycle that we try to continue to feed and to keep alive. And we've done our best in visualizing a kind of complex relationship where our workforce board, we do this research, we create online collateral and trainings, and how do we translate this research findings from 30-page PDFs into things that teachers and students and job seekers can use and access easily. And we get feedback, right? What are our schools saying? Incorporate this concept or this theme, or this ties in with processes that we are already building or topics that we're already exploring so that we can support that more effectively. We can then train those educators and families on what we've created and take, again, feedback from our schools on what it is they would need to learn about. And that's a conversation as well. Sometimes one of us or both of us, we don't know what we don't know. So we say, oh no, here's information that you want to convey to your educators and families. And sometimes it's asking for information that they're looking for in particular. And then, we talked about that 2-generation approach where sort of 2 things happen at that point. One is the educators can create those meaningful learning experiences based on the tools we give them, and we can collaborate on that, right? We can help design that curriculum. We can help incorporate that labor market information. And then the students, we hope, are making those more informed decisions about their futures, and we're working hard on really nailing down a model for how we measure that and how we show that impact and track how those students are evolving in their perspective and their preparation for the future. And then in the other realm, I guess, in the adult realm, the parents are connecting with our workforce board and the services that we have that can advance their career goals. Workforce development boards can be a really well-kept and unfortunately well-kept secret in areas where we have training funds that can support somebody in going back and getting certifications, in moving up their career path, however they're interested in doing it. And we want to make sure that's in front of as many people as possible. So the schools are a really great partner in terms of reaching that audience. And of course, that feeds the cycle, right? The schools learn from the experience, that informs all the future work that we develop, and we figure out, all right, what do we want to know about next? What are we going to research? How are we going to bring it to our community? And it really does focus on the needs of our community and leveraging the assets that they already bring. You know, if there's an incredible family and community engagement team, great. Let's learn from them. Let's build on the connections they have and the strategies that they use to get this into the hands of the families. And let's use the incredible teachers that are there already who have started doing this work, whether it's through career and technical education in the traditional way we approach careers or otherwise. You know, this work is bigger than CTE, career and technical education. It's really taking the stance that every student should have the opportunity to engage in this kind of thinking about their future, and finding the best ways to do that, whether it is through a traditional career technical education course or through a different rotation that they might experience. So with that, we've left, you know, plenty of time for conversation, for questions and answers, and you can of course contact us here as well. So I will find.
Hey, Sarah, that was a great review. Just a couple of questions or points from me to clarify for the group. When we first got this off the ground before the pandemic, and there was talk of being able to make the Launchpad environment also a career center type of experience for the parents of the students. I don't know where that is currently, or if that's practicable given where we are and going forward, and as we rethink our career center approach and where they are. Could you talk about that?
Yeah. In terms of, you know, embedding that resource, it's definitely something that's a bit on hold now, but
Mhm.
the physical space is being used by those family and community engagement teams. So they might have an individual who's talking with a parent in the community about their career needs. They take them into this space and then can use that space to have that conversation with them and to move them forward in their career thinking and their engagement. What we'd like to do in the future is also provide some training for those teams to help them connect with the resources that we offer so that handoff is smoother. There's been partnership in terms of Gohan Value in particular has something called Parent University, where they bring their parents through the RIASEC framework in that language and career opportunity. And our career centers have gone and co-presented in that Parent University to share the opportunities that we have available for them. So we're finding ways to test out that partnership and look at what might be the best way to, again, get the resources into the school community so the parents don't have to come looking for us.
Yeah, and as we look at continuing to refine or reinvent the adult career center experience, this is part of where we see that really being the sweet spot, because some career center locations, even in our region and across the country, are have a bureaucratic feel. They're not as accessible and natural in the workflow of families, but they're coming to school, and why not do it right here where we can just build it out further and make that a lot easier on people. So we're really optimistic about merging those efforts and making it easier on the parents as well, who have their own career needs. It never ends. Hey, there was a question in the chat, Sarah, about the key practices that lead to connection between school leaders and workforce leaders. What would you say to that?
Yeah, well, I would go back to those strategies of first finding the shared, well, even before the shared space, identifying that common goal of what do we both want for our community and for our students.
Mm-hmm.
And that is for them to be thriving and successful in what they achieve. But finding those common spaces and starting to interact in that way is a really great place to start that practice. So if there is a an opportunity where there's, I was going to say a school board meeting is a little too formal, but finding those engagement opportunities in the community. So if you are convening a group of people to discuss trying to think of this and frame it in a broad enough way that would apply to different scenarios, but I'll do my best. So if you are bringing together a bunch of employers in technology, for example, invite someone from a school, and that might be a career and technical education instructor. That might be a superintendent of some sort. You know, it kind of depends on your structure and what they're doing, but inviting people into your space is a great way to start opening up that door to be two-way. That answers the question.
Yeah, and I would just add to that on the workforce side, our side, it's easier not to do this. And we could do a whole lot of other things, and it's outside the typical way workforce boards operate. But we have this shared value and vision of doing this more impactfully than reports that sit on the shelf or just reach some professionals but don't reach the students really in impactful ways. And so Sarah and I, years ago with Ed, we have that shared value of, gosh, we could do this better and let's commit to it. But you have to have that on the workforce side, the team that's willing to lean in and do this and want to do it. We could have easily said, no, we've checked the box, we've done the report, we're done, move on. And so you've got to have the willingness on the workforce side. And on the education side, you need a really engaged visionary folks like Ed and David Miyashiro, the superintendent at Gohan Valley, because once they saw the first iteration of our poster boards, they were very excited because it really aligned with their values of we need to do the educational piece differently and embed career thinking very early on. So we are peas in a pod because we both believe this instead of trying to convince one side or the other. So when you have that collaboration, off to the races you go. And then Sarah's with her education teaching background and vision for this and creativity and doing that collaboratively with Ed and David and the team has led to all of this progress and all of this buy-in and then expansion. And even beyond the other middle schools, Sarah, you've got other school districts you're working with and other folks like Ed and David who really get it, and then they just can't get enough and move quickly enough. What are you seeing with other districts?
There's such a hunger out there for this work because there's a recognition in our society in general that our education system is not meeting the needs of our economy. And there's tons of conversation about why that is and where that is, and conversation about the value of education. You know, people are seeing enrollments in the last couple of years drop off at our higher education institutions. Where are we making that connection for individuals so that they can really see where they fit into our world? And um, there's a recognition that, oh, we need to be making that at a younger age. We need to help them to connect with their future, with that vision, in order for them to not only stay engaged with their education, but to be successful later on in life. And the recognition also that it's not enough to do that at the last minute when you're about to spit somebody out into the world. There's a lot of questions and a lot of answers that people need to think through in order to get their hands on this. So we have, conversations with lots of districts in our specific area. Gohan Valley has supported schools and districts in other parts of the country who have been wanting to replicate some of what the Launchpad is doing, that career center, and bring that model to other places. And we're working on it locally with other schools in our region. But there's a hunger for it. And in education training, there's not always the opportunity to learn about it or to be prepared for it. So there's a lack of a know-how of how do we do this work? And that's where we can come in and help to feed that.
So Sarah, how do you communicate the value of career development to those in the school system who don't value it or get it or are ready to embrace the extra work?
Mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
you see this through Ed and David and what they are overcoming. Maybe you could kind of speak on behalf of what you've heard from them.
Yeah. So I think first I would say you do it gradually. I think in any situation, in any workplace, when somebody sort of drops a new initiative or direction um, out of the blue, it doesn't have a whole lot of chance for success. And it's about building that support um, in a grassroots way when you're able to, engaging, finding your champions in terms of the teachers and educators, and also using a variety of approaches to show why this is impactful, right? So examples of that, using recordings of students talking about how this has impacted them, using research like the OECD research I showed you before that shows how much of an impact this can make on a person's future when they experience this at a younger age. Using connecting people with their own life experience. That's, not always going to work because everybody has different life experiences, but the number one thing I hear from people when we talk about this work is, man, I wish I had this. I wish I had this when I was in school. And I think I was going to say all of us, some of us had, like, I remember there was a course called Career Internet Exploration in our 9th grade year. And I remember very little from it, except that nobody really took it seriously. And there's that hope. Somebody would ask for that slide again. There is that desire in people of like, I see how my life could have gone, differently, even if they're satisfied with where they are right now, how I could have like saved some strife in trying to figure out what they are meant to do. So connecting them to their own experience and thinking about what it might have meant for them if they had this in their own lives. And then finally, with educators, it's also connecting them with their values and their purpose. Why are they teaching students? And what is it that they remember most from being in high school and from the different educators? What is it that they want to see for their students down the line? It's very infrequently, and this is coming from a former math teacher, it's very infrequently that I want them to be able to, interpret trigonometric functions at a high level, 10 years down the line, if that's not connected to their job, right? They want their students to be thriving, they want them to be successful, they want them to be happy, and they want them, and this all really very much ties into those desires. So those are some strategies that we've had success with in terms of creating buy-in.
So Sarah, maybe you could speak a little bit more to RIASEC and how Gohan Valley in particular utilizes this, because they have RIASEC parties and they have a lot of other tactile ways of connecting with students so that they can really identify their codes.
Yeah. So Gohan Value is unique in that they developed an entire curriculum founded on this framework. And it is meant for every student to engage with in every classroom every day. And that means when you are doing a group project, that students are able to self-identify with, okay, we are doing a project to buy a car or something, right? Or create a car dealership, or I'm conventional, so I'm really good at organizing and then making lists and paying attention to details. So I'm going to do the parts that require that. I'm investigative, so I'm good with like numbers and investigation. So maybe I'm going to do some pricing pieces. I'm artistic, so I'm going to do the advertisements for buying or selling this car. It's incorporating and helping them to connect with everything they're doing in terms of who they are and what they have to contribute to the group and the environment. In a class that is focused on, maybe it's a reading or literature class, it's looking at the characters in the books through the lens of the RIASEC. What do you think their themes are, and how does that come out in what they do in the books? And so It's a really deep and intentional integration through that district in a way that takes a lot more than we're able to do as an outside partner, right? We can support in them in getting there through the different resources we have to offer, but a lot of that needs to be driven from the school leaders and what they want to achieve and how they think they can get there. So using a curriculum like the World of Work, which they've integrated into an online tool called Beable now, that connects literacy learning with interests. So Beable will they'll take an interest inventory. They'll also assess Lexile scores, and they will recommend readings that align with the student's interest and also can help them to increase their Lexile score. They will show careers and what Lexile you need to achieve that career and show the progress of the student towards that Lexile, that here's where you are, and if you read this many articles, you'll get closer, and then you'll be able to achieve the Lexile you need for that career. So they're really dynamic in the partnerships that they engage to make this real for the students in a meaningful way.
There's a question, Sarah, around how this pays off in terms of saving public dollars, which I think leads to the collaboration with the University of San Diego and the study that they've partnered with them on around some of these outcomes. Can you speak to any of how they're tracking the data and outcomes?
Yeah, they're still pretty early in that. I think a couple of years into collecting data, that's meant to be a longer study, but already they're tracking things like student and teacher perceptions, right? How much does a teacher value this work and see it as important for the development of students? How clear is a student on their ability to name a specific career that they might aspire to in life? Can they identify and name their themes? So they're really looking at student growth and how that persists through career and how that impacts their career long term. In terms of public dollars, I'm not sure how that is incorporated or if that's incorporated into what their study is currently.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not something we've gotten our heads around quite yet, but certainly if there are any ideas out there, we're open to your recommendations and resources. And we're thinking about that, and we're thinking about how we meaningfully can use that kind of data to make the case for, what Peter's always saying is like, really, we want to put ourselves out of business because we can do this well through education. Then you don't need a workforce board, right? We've given you all the skills you need, and we've connected you to your career, and you've got it. So we're not needed to intervene anymore. Realistically, there'll always be some need, but ideally, you could eliminate the whole workforce system if this were done well.
There you go. We're trying to put ourselves out of work, and that would be a good outcome down the road. One of the other things that this clearly can help get at is this crisis of the opportunity youth and disconnection of so many youth. And before the pandemic, that number was in the neighborhood of 5 million in the country and has only gone up since. But disconnection happens for a wide variety of reasons, as we know. And I think this gets squarely at it when the more we can connect and excite students around who they are and how this can map to a career, and as Ed always says, their future possible selves. And everybody has value and a place in the world, and doing this in this way has been absolutely life-changing for so many students and families and the school district and us, that we know this is the path forward. If we can do this work, then there's going to be less need for all of the retraining and triage work that the workforce development system has to do and will continue to do, because it's a hard world out there with a wildly changing economy, and having the skills necessary to make it in these very unusual times, and even when we come out of them, hopefully. So the study of the savings is aspirational and something we want to get at, but that's a whole nother line of work that is costly and a bit out of reach. But we know without a doubt that this is having a dramatic impact, and it's really reshaping our focus, because we know that if we can do this, we can get people on the trajectory to happy careers and fulfilled lives, and making the income to have sustaining careers for themselves and their families. And that changes the world. And that's what we want to do. We don't want to be in the business of just trying to retrain, and knowing that if we do this differently, then that's less and less necessary, as people can just thrive in their careers.
Yeah. And what I'll add to that is, it's not just about thinking about what I want to be and learning about that and learning about who I am, but that third piece of how do I get there is the one that's most overlooked, I think, especially in our education systems. And, it's a natural progression of things. There's a lot of focus on college, and that is without a doubt, and the data shows us, a path to success in life. And there's lots of correlation to higher income and a higher degree. But when you look at the data locally, we see that on average, um, I said on average, and I'm now not sure if I'm talking about on average, but there are a number of careers where with an associate degree, you are able to earn more than with a bachelor's degree. And that is a reality that people need to know about. And if that's a path that they choose to take, they need to be supported in believing that that is also a valid path. That there is dignity in all work, again, as Ed says, and that they can achieve their goals through more than just the 4-year degree route. And teachers need to know that too. If you're an educator, most likely you went through your 12 years or 13 years of undergrad and you did a 4-year degree and you went into the classroom, maybe with a master's degree. And that is the pathway that you are familiar with and that you know. But it's not the only pathway to success. And helping to illuminate some of those other opportunities so that if a person hits a roadblock, they're able to know there are other off ramps or on ramps that they can go to get to a successful outcome.
I wish when I was a kid I went through Gohan Valley, because I was like all too many, where you just kind of made it your way through, luckily, and then college and finished and then into career. But I never even did an assessment until I was well into my career, and couldn't say early on what I wanted to do. And having this for our kids now and families is really, really transformative, and why we're so passionate about it. Because if we can do this right, we can really build up the talent pool for our region and get people into great pathways, and get ahead of the other social ills that are happening as a result of so much disconnection and confusion in our world. But as Superintendent Miyashiro in Cajon Valley says, or kind of a bit of a quote of, I don't know if this is quote for quote, but the sins or errors of education show up in the workforce system and in the career centers. If he feels that if they're not doing it right, then we do try and do it later, and we've got to change that dynamic. And that's why their vision and our passion for this just aligns so well. And we only just want to take it as far as we can go. We don't want to just have it in San Diego County. We want to have our colleagues and other workforce boards embrace this approach or modify it. We take no fealty for, how it has to be delivered, but we want our other workforce boards to really lean into this work, and not just check the box, and be willing to roll up their sleeves and come up with their own tools or adapt ours, and then we can change this disconnection, and we can get people onto fulfilling happy careers because they know who they are and they know what's out there, and they can connect the dots, and not be stuck with, I don't know what I want to do. And we've got to change that. So I think we're coming up on time. I don't know if there's anything else, Alicia or Celeste, that you'd like to do as we close out.
No, I think you guys did a great job of keeping up with those questions there in the chat. So you took my role away from me. But thank you again to Peter and Sarah both for that wonderful webinar and for all that information. And to all of our attendees, I will be sending out a link to this recording. If you want to watch it again, you can. The link will also be posted on the NCBA website. And then I will send out a follow-up email with information on continuing education. And if you guys have any other questions for Sarah and Peter, you can email those to me and I can get those to them. That's all we've got for today. So thank you again to Sarah and Peter.
Our pleasure. Good to be with you.
Of course, have
Thanks,
a great rest of
everybody.
your day.
All right. Take care.